there, I'm Rachel with the Charlotte Mason Plenary. Today I'd like to tell you about one of my favorite American history books, America First by Lawton Evans. Now this is the 1920s vintage edition, and a lot of CM curriculums either use it or recommend it, and it is definitely a living book. It tells American history in story after story after story, and it's so good and it's so narrative that you just want to keep reading. But there are a few problems with this vintage edition, which is why I decided to update it. So this is the updated edition of America First, and the reason I wanted to update it is because I wanted to restore dignity to all the disenfranchised people depicted in the book. And in doing that, I was wanting to restore the dignity of studying American history for both my children and for yours. So let's talk about some of the problems in the vintage edition of America First and why I decided to update the book. Now, like I said, the book was published in the 1920s, and unfortunately it contains some language and attitudes from that time period that are racially insensitive, to say the least. Honestly, I had a love-hate relationship with the vintage edition because it's so good, and yet it contained words that describe people that just were not okay with me. Words like savages or bloodthirsty savages to describe American Indians, and words like Negroes to describe enslaved peoples or even freed slaves in and around the time of the Civil War. Now, I talk about a few of the other updates and things that I did to the book over in a blog post on the Plenary website, but when you get right down to it, I want to teach my children compassion for others. That's it. That's why I updated the book. So let me show you some examples of what I did. I edited or removed any disrespectful and offensive language and subject matter that appeared in the original publication. Any language that described Native Americans as savages or bloodthirsty has been removed. The term Indian has been replaced with Native American or simply natives in most instances. The term Negro has been replaced with person or citizen, or when referring to enslaved peoples prior to or during the Civil War, the term Negro has been replaced with slave. All instances of the term master and Mars have been removed. The term white men has been changed to explorers, English colonists, or simply citizens or people, depending on the context. Okay, so let me show you some examples from the original text and then the updated text. Here's the original text. The friendly relations between the Indians and the white men were not restored for several years. John Sevier was constantly leading war parties against the marauding savages. And here's the updated text. The friendly relations between the natives and the colonists were not restored for several years. John Sevier was constantly leading war parties against the natives. An old Negro named Pompey, who had been selling fruit to the British, was engaged as a guide. An old man named Pompey, who had been selling fruit to the British, was engaged as a guide. He then made his Negro slaves put their heads out of the windows and utter loud yells of defiance. The Indians and the Tories recognized Schuyler's voice. He then made his men put their heads out of the windows and utter loud yells of defiance. The natives and Tories recognized Schuyler's voice. Okay, so other updates in the book specifically addressed restoring dignity to enslaved peoples depicted in the book. One example is a chapter called The Rescue of Jerry. Now, Jerry McHenry was an escaped slave that made his way to the North and built a life for himself in the North. The original author only refers to him as Jerry through the entire chapter, not McHenry or not Jerry McHenry, and yet he refers to everybody else in the book by their last name. So why not Mr. McHenry? It seemed insulting to me that this brave man was only referred to as Jerry, as if he were some sort of child or person of lesser importance. So I changed the chapter so that every instance of Jerry is now McHenry, and to give Mr. McHenry the respect that he most certainly deserves. Now, another chapter was called Through the Heart of the South, and this one, Evans uses a slave dialect to depict a freed slave woman. Anytime she speaks, he uses this dialect speech. And again, it just seemed insulting to me, so I changed all of her speech and quotes to just regular good old English to give her the respect that she deserves. She certainly deserves the updated text. There were other chapters that I just cut completely. They were either too violent or worse, they depicted slavery as if it wasn't really that bad of a thing after all. One chapter in particular that I cut was called Christmas on the Plantation. And let me read you some of the original text from that chapter that's no longer in the updated book. Down in the quarters, the Negroes were having their feast also, almost as bountiful and certainly as good as that at the big house. Then followed dancing and maybe a marriage to celebrate the day, while they praised the old master and the old miss for their goodness and kindness. The day came to an end at last, as all happy days do. Can there ever be such times as those on the old plantation, where a kind-hearted master shared his abundance with those he loved and owned, and lived in peace, comfort, and security, because he lived in kindness and goodwill? So, as you can see, there's really no fixing that chapter. It was just so over the top, offensive to me. I just had to cut it completely. So now you know some of the changes that I made to the updated edition of America First. You can get the paperback edition over on Amazon.com or a PDF download edition over at the Plenary website, and I'll put those links for you in the description. I hope that you and your children will enjoy using the updated edition of America First. Thanks so much for watching.